So Scott, I will turn this over to you.
Okay, thanks, Deb. And hi, everybody. Welcome to the third installment of the Granite State Independent Living Advocacy Series. Today, we were going to focus on messaging and media strategies with our co-hosts, Ryan and Jeff from the previous weeks. We've talked a lot about politics and the legislature and making sure that our consumer voices are heard loud and clear with folks who are setting policy. Today, we want to take an hour or so and focus in on how to get our stories told in local media and in places that will raise awareness about GSIL throughout New Hampshire. So for those of you who don't know me all that well, my background is actually in media. I'm a recovering journalist, and I did 3 years in radio and about 12 years in TV as a 5 o'clock anchor and political director for WMUR TV. So I'm not an expert, but I played one on television for more than a decade. And so I try to utilize those relationships and my own pathway of experience in dealing with reporters on a regular basis to hopefully build some tips and ideas for all of you as you're trying to figure out how to tell a good story, whether it's human interest, whether it's a problem that needs to be solved, a crisis that needs to be resolved, or something that might just need to be changed and brought some attention to. So with that, I'd like to get started. I'm going to open up my my little presentation and make sure I can share my screen with you. Where's the share screen? Deb, I don't see the share screen function anymore. Oh, there it is. Got it. Here we go. All right. Can everybody see that cover page that says how to share the GSIL story?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. So why do we do something like this? Obviously, trying to get a story told through the media raises a great deal of awareness for what GSIL does, the services that it provides to people, so that perhaps we're recruiting more consumers and helping more people. Maybe we're answering questions for families that have some questions or challenges around the ideas of helping folks have an independent life and lifestyle. Maybe they want to learn more about what we're doing, and maybe we have some unique stories and people that we can spotlight to be able to share what GSIL does, and sometimes what we might need in terms of assistance and help ourselves. So I try to tell all of my clients, when it comes to media relations and storytelling, we always have a story to tell, whether it's folks overcoming challenges, whether it's the service and offerings and programs that GSIL has. There's a lot to highlight. And it's important to note that from the perspective of making friends in the media, my sense has always been, I always live by the cliche, you make your hay while the sun is shining. Don't wait until there's a crisis or a major problem that's about to really blow up before you reach out to members of the media locally and regionally. It's important for them to know who you are, what you do, and what your story might be before you really get out there. Because my experience has always been that the people who answer the phone from a media call and the people who can communicate the best and most clearly are the ones who get the most attention. So one thing to keep in mind as we are now entering into the year 2023 is that the media landscape is and has been changing a great deal over the last several years. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you that social media has had a major impact on what traditional media has been. I mean, in my childhood, there were 3 TV stations, a handful of radio stations, and a bunch of newspapers. Now, social media has really transformed the marketplace, and it is still shifting in ways that does not help those of us who are trying to get our stories out through traditional media. So for example, what I mean by that is many newspapers nowadays are struggling to stay in business. The economics are very difficult for them because very few people are subscribing to the newspaper that lands on the doorstep every morning at your house. They are more likely to find your information online or on a social media channel. Same with radio, that's moving over to things like podcasts and Alexa and other types of technology that takes us away from the traditional radio dial. And how many of us have abandoned the traditional cable channel network for things like Hulu and other social media platforms that provide live broadcasts. So things have become really divided up. What that means is revenue streams and media outlets are decreasing. There's just not as much money, so there aren't as many reporters, and it makes it that much harder to sell a story nowadays. So what we have to do is twofold. Number one, it's important for us to develop our own audience through our own social media channels so that we can share the good news, have the calls to action when we need, and stay in touch with people who care about what it is that we do. But we can also refine our pitches to the media to make sure that they are more successful. So that's how we sort of bring the connections between media and what it is that we do. This is a not super surprising graphic, but I just wanted to show you, this is the trend. This is where we continue going. So the dark red is 18 to 35-year-olds. The peach colored is sort of your middle age folks, youngish to close to retirement. And then the light sort of bluish gray is retirees. Look at the trend for where people are getting their information from. The internet and social media is dominating among young people. So in 20, 30 years, the idea of a print newspaper even landing on your doorstep or being available at the convenience store isn't even going to be realistic. So we have to play where people are getting their information. We have to be in that area. And I think we're doing pretty well. These are the trends. 71% of the US population has a smartphone. I actually probably would think that that number is outdated because that's about a year old. I think the number is increasing, but the idea of mobile and tablets in people's hands at all times suggests to me at least that the media has to make sure that no matter how they tell their stories, it has to be told through today's technology. Yesterday's news and yesterday's news channels are really fading away. So when we're talking about messaging and media strategies, you have to think about not just why we're doing it, but how you do it. What are the reasons behind connecting with the media? So from a GSIL perspective, and I'm talking to you as a consumer, someone who cares about this entire organization, but is also trying to help tell the story for it, whether we need something or whether we're just trying to demonstrate and raise awareness for what we do. Branding is a very important thing. We all know what the golden arches are. What we really want to be able to do is make sure that whenever people see the insignia of GSIL, they know exactly who we are, what we stand for, the services we provide, the kinds of people that we are and that we interact with. So that's an overall big picture goal, just raising awareness. Basic communications. And like I said before, thanks to social media, communications through the media is a very different exercise now. 20 years ago, the newspaper shows up, you're listening passively to the radio, you might have the news on in the background while the family's making dinner. It's a one-way conversation, it's passive learning. Now, communications through social media, thanks to Facebook and Twitter, it's a conversation. It's a two-way dialogue. It's happening in real time. The pace of information flow is a whole lot faster than it used to be several years ago when the only deadlines were middle to late afternoon for TV, maybe the evening time for radio, and first thing in the morning for newspaper or other print periodicals. So because things are happening in real time, and because it's more of a conversation, you have to think about what your pitch looks like in terms of what the media needs and what you can expect. For GSIL's purposes, public relations is important. We want to be able to portray and broadcast throughout whatever channels we have who it is we are, what we do, and what we stand for. I'm extraordinarily proud to be a part of the GSIL family. I love the mission goals, and I especially love the fact that the consumers are in charge. The folks who are using these programs and services are the ones who are calling the shots and helping Deb guide this agency through today's challenges and into the future to try and help and serve as many people as possible. That public relations exercise needs to be woven into the kind of stories that we try to tell and want to tell to the local media. So featuring positive information, using social media to highlight services and accomplishments, a steady drip of information to inform, to entertain, to connect. And then, of course, we want to attract supporters and businesses. A couple of our lovely and talented faces here on this screen. Part of the reason why we have to focus on the locals and business leaders is because we need public awareness. And the more people know and understand what's going on with GSIL, I personally think the greater the support will be. because I mean, I'm biased, right? I'm around the table with many of you all the time. I think this is an outstanding organization. It's well led. It does amazing things for people. There are lots of happy endings to the stories of people who are seeking our services and supports. So we just need to make sure that we're recruiting more and more people and more followers. So what are the options? I talked a minute ago about how traditional media is kind of giving way to social media and that the lines have been blurred. While that's absolutely and totally true, in New Hampshire, because we are an older than average state, no, I'm not calling any of us old, but our average age in New Hampshire is one of the oldest in the country. It means that our news consuming habits remain somewhat traditional as well. It so happens that the New Hampshire Association of Broadcasters, which is the state's TV station, New Hampshire Public TV and Radio, and the state's commercial radio stations, are also one of my clients. And I know from their own research that radio listenership per capita in New Hampshire and TV viewership per capita in New Hampshire is much higher than most other states. Now, obviously, because we're a one-horse town with just one commercial affiliate, getting local TV news is only going to come from one place. So they've got rock star level ratings among New Hampshire news viewers, but radio stations do extremely well too. We have a very high percentage of people across the age spectrum that still listen traditionally. So that means Neil and Marga in the morning on WZID, or the WOKQ morning waking crew, or Greg in the morning buzz, or maybe Jack Heath on the AM in Binney radio, or Chris Ryan down on WGIR in Manchester. These are folks that are lead voices, that are thought leaders, that are opinion leaders, and are folks where a lot of people get their news from. They still matter. It's not just social media, but to pitch to a traditional news source versus a social media source, sometimes it's a slightly different conversation with media outlets. So you have to think through what your options look like. How do you start that process? By asking and answering a few simple and direct questions. When it comes to social media, you really just need to stop and think about what it is you're trying to accomplish. What do you want to say? Who is it that you're speaking to? And what are the message goals? Are you trying to recruit more members? Are you trying to perhaps raise awareness around a specific educational training program that GSIL offers? Are you just pitching a human interest story and you want everybody to know how much of a kick-ass awesome guy Jeff Dickinson is doing what he does every day in the government affairs arena of GSIL? And we've got this great story that features Jeff and all that he does. That may lead to people understanding the advocacy work that we do, but maybe sometimes we just want to highlight a cool cat like Jeff. So asking and answering these questions in advance helps you focus exactly what you want to do in your conversation. Because the one thing I can tell you is that when you're dealing with the media landscape, even though we have a bunch of radio stations, and even though technically still there are several reporters who are out there patrolling the beat on a daily basis in all walks of life around New Hampshire, there's an unbelievable amount of competition for attention. So you have to have a refined message, a sharpened pitch, a timely point for doing it right now, and then the good follow through as customer service so that the reporter gets what you're promising and you've made that meaningful connection. So where do you begin with something like that? I always tell my clients that it's really, really important to truly and actually be unique, new, timely, and different. So for example, I have a few clients that are school districts, and my school district friends love to think that stuff that they're doing in their classrooms is brand new, totally state of the art, absolutely unique. But when I challenge them on whether any other districts are doing the same kinds of implemented programs or neat new things in classrooms, it gives them pause and they realize, oh, okay, maybe it's not so unique after all. Maybe I'm kind of doing what everybody else is. Fortunately, with GSIL, we're in our own space. We have sort of a command position, if you will, for the kinds of things that we provide to our consumers and to the community. So I always encourage people when it comes to trying to figure out great stories that highlight GSIL, highlight its consumers, highlight need, raise awareness for recruitment, or whatever the purpose would be for doing outreach to the media, you have to start with what's unique about our pitch. What are we doing? What do we want people to know? How can it be a visual demonstration or an audio demonstration? Because again, thanks to social media, almost everything has to have a visual or an audio type element to it to get people's attention. You have to think about that kind of thing in advance. And as I always tell people, unscientifically, imagine that you're going home at the end of the day and you're talking to your friend, your loved one, your spouse, or your family member calls, and they're asking, hey, how was your day, Mike? What did you do today? Oh, well, I did this, that, and the other thing. Oh, that's pretty cool. The factor. That's interesting. If you can kind of pass the factor test, you're probably on the right track for something to be able to get people's attention. So in terms of hitting the mark, ways to get people's attention, there are a few questions, again, that you can specifically ask and answer for yourself that I think will give you a really, really solid head start on figuring out whether this is a good thing to pitch to the media. So here are a few questions. Numbers matter. Big numbers always matter with the local media. So, for example, for the story you're pitching, how many people are or could be affected? Deb Ritzy and I have talked a lot about the wonderful numbers of consumers that we are serving through GSIL program and services. But we also know there are many thousands of people more who could be working with GSIL and taking advantage of what our offerings are. Making connections to those people is an important goal and really a mission for GSIL today and tomorrow. So part of the question could be, how many people could be affected by this story if they know more about what it is we're doing? Are these big numbers? Are there great visuals and video or audio that we can have it? Is it happening right now or is it about to happen? This is one of those most critical questions that I always want you to keep in mind. If you forget anything else about dealing with the media from what I tell you today, remember this. If it has already happened, there's only one file that your pitch is going into, and that's the circular file, the garbage can next to the desk, because there are so many things going on that the media is trying to keep up with that are happening in real time, or that they have to position themselves to be at because it's getting ready to happen, that any event that took place 5 minutes ago or last week or yesterday, they're not going to worry about it. They're not going to cover it. Now, there are a few exceptions to that general rule, like, oh, Deb just promoted 14 different people, and we want to put them into the Faces and Places page of Business NH Magazine or the New Hampshire Business Review. Those little announcements and pacers are great, and we can push those out after the fact. But if there's a major event like our fundraiser, our spring fundraiser, which is just an awesome thing, we can't put out a press release afterwards and have great expectation that a media outlet's going to do anything substantive with the story because it's already happened. Their best bet is for us to recruit them and encourage them to show up. So if it's happening or about to happen, timeliness really matters. Is it unprecedented? Is it happening close by? Is it accessible for reporters? A great story in Colebrook, it's not going to get covered nearly as much as a great story in Manchester, because just having to hoof it to the site is going to be a huge problem and challenge for media outlets, because many of them have to do things by phone or at least close by. When I say unprecedented, going back to the school district example, I have to say, for all intents and purposes, it is really important for you to objectively ask and answer that question really honestly with yourself, like a look in the mirror moment. Are we really doing something here with this program that nobody else is doing? I can give a wonderful example of something that GSIL has been involved with for the last few years that Deb told me all about not that long ago, and that we've worked with Chronicle and tried to push this storyline out. And I still believe the story will be told, but it's the element of GSIL that rehabilitates equipment and items of need for families that may struggle to be able to afford anything new or anything at all. I think that's a remarkable sort of outreach into our consumer community to folks that need this kind of equipment but struggle to be able to obtain it. I think it's a wonderful service, and being able to do it at cost or at steep discounts to help families to overcome challenges that maybe they just didn't see coming or were sudden and emergent. I just think it's really neat. And for a nonprofit to be behind something like that, it's just very impressive. So those kinds of things, that's unprecedented. Of course, always remembering the hump factor. And then sometimes it's important to find a connection to current events. So this is a really old and dated example, but we all remember when the actor Christopher Reeve, a former Superman, injured his spine. And it was from a, a freak accident involving horse riding, if I remember correctly. And his story became an awareness exercise for injuries of his type, and the kind of science and medical technology work and research that was being done to try to help people in the same situation as Chris, being able to try and find ways that they could live longer, healthier, and maybe a life of recovery with technology and medical developments happening. There was a huge amount of intense focus around his accident and his recovery and life and lifestyle afterwards. Those are the kinds of stories that have real meaning in current events. We can do things like that. So there are times when maybe a focus on a particular ailment or disease, or a focus on a specific accident or incident that creates injuries that might be connected to people that we are interacting with on a regular basis, we can use that to localize what might be a national story. Those are the kinds of tips and ideas that can be effective in dealing with a pitch to the media. So let's just say you've made your pitch, you've got a great story that's done, and now it's time to actually sort of deliver on the product, if you will. If you've known me for longer than 3.5 minutes, you know that one of my very favorite approaches to life is to keep it simple. I'm a huge believer in the KISS theory. So for example, a rule of 3. If you're about to do something with the media and you've got your pitch and you want to be able to tell your story, but you also know that you've got a limited time to be able to really get that point across, I'm a big fan of the rule of 3. Have 3 major points that you want to make sure comes across to any media outlet that's covering you, covering your story. So you can get into the fine print of each of those 3 points, but break it down to a couple of very manageable pieces. Because think of it this way. Like I said, I spent 15 years in the media, which meant that I was a professional jack of all trades and a master of absolutely nothing. But the news audience that turned on the TV every single night expected me to be an expert in whatever arena that might be. The thing is, I didn't always necessarily know what my day was going to be when I was walking through the newsroom door. Covering politics, I had a little bit more control over my own day-to-day news covering agenda, but breaking news is a scrambling, it's the scrambled eggs of your schedule, and you never know what you're going to have to know a lot about to be able to share information and share a story with your audience. So on any given day, I had to be an expert in life sciences or medical technology or taxes, or how about courts and law and process. So there's a lot of information coming at reporters. The best thing you can do for them is break it down into manageable bite-sized pieces, keep it simple, and focus your own message. It's a good exercise for you in delivery, but it will also help more ensure that the story that you want to see is the story that they end up telling, because sometimes confusion can lead to a whole sideways storytelling process that frustrates both of you. So keep it simple. Remember and always keep in mind that you are the expert on this content, not the reporter. They have to gather the information from you. They're relying on you for that information, whether it's background, the details, or some guidance on what's important in whatever topic it is that you're talking about. Show some personality. Don't be afraid to be yourself. I know that public speaking is one of those things that some people would rather be shot than stand in front of a microphone. I get it. I understand that fear. With a little bit of practice, a little bit of focus, keeping your message simple, and just being yourself, I think that eliminates the fear and the margin for error for any storytelling exercise you might find yourself in. You can also always team up with other people who might be a good communicator, and you can give them the information to do it. There's all kinds of options within all of this, but if you keep it simple, be yourself, remember that the more people learn about GSIL, the more they're going to love you. And like I say at the end, for goodness sake, just start talking. Share what's going on with the GSIL family and what they're doing. If it's a truly unique, timely, or extraordinary event, these are most, but not all, of the media outlets that are the first aggressive targets for statewide news coverage. Public Radio, the Business Review, Nashua Telegraph, Concord Monitor is one of them, the Union Leader, MUR, GIR-AM, because they have a really big signal that covers a lot, but there's Lakes Region Radio as well. There are a lot of outlets, and depending on what they need for news stories, the length of the story, and the kind of story it is, there's always a good target for local media for the types of stories you want to tell. So If it's an extraordinary story, you want to talk to them. I think I'll stop there because, like I said, I wanted to be able to have this as more of a conversation. There are a lot of different ways that you can go about sort of building out your communications network with people. But I think the first step, and I'll jump out of this at this point, the first step in this entire exercise is really getting an assessment of what stories you might want to share with the media and what categories they fit into. Is it a timely event? Is it an ongoing problem without solutions? Is it a new solution to a long-lasting problem and you want to raise awareness? What is the story, or what are the lists of stories? Take the inventory, figure out what it's going to be, and then in the meantime, start getting an assessment. And this is where I can help as a sort of an extended member of the GSIL family. I have good contacts with reporters, so you don't have to start from scratch, but you can certainly start with me. If there's, like, for example, Ryan has this great idea on the story that he wants to have told, but isn't quite sure which media outlet we should start with or how to pitch the story, I can help you with that conversation, having done this a bunch of times before from the pitching end and from the receiving end of this entire exercise. But getting the inventory of potential stories and then figuring out what might be the best mix and match is a really good way to get started. And then in the meantime, just getting to know the small group of people who decide what's a good story and what's not a good story is helpful. And I'll give a quick example before I toss it over to Deb, who's got a question. So for example, there might be a really good, strong series of reasons. I mean, of course there are, that we would do a feature story on Ryan, that his story is a powerful story as both a consumer and an advocate within GSIL, that he's done some remarkable things, he's overcome some incredible challenges, and he's got a powerful story to tell. Maybe that's a story that's good enough for a 7-minute video on Chronicle. Okay, maybe it's not. Maybe there's something specific that he's doing that is a specific project for GSIL, and he wants to be the spokesperson and raise awareness around that project. Well, maybe that's a good story for a union leader article, or maybe a quicker minute-long story on WMUR. The content, the pitch, the timeliness, all of that are factors for why you would want to figure out where the best places are to pitch stories. So how about if I stop there for a minute or a few? And Deb, I see your hand is up, so fire away.
So Scott, thank you for being here and giving us all this information. So one of the questions that I often get asked from folks is, how much time should we expect to have with TV, radio, newspapers, so that if we are pitching this story, and for us, the story is like, you know, it's a lifetime movie, right? I could tell you, like a 2-hour movie, but we know that that's not practical in the real world. So what is if we're planning this, what should people think about as a reasonable amount of time to capture it, tell it, and then have the end? So what is that?
That is an excellent question. And the quick answer is it will depend on the story itself. But with that said, generally speaking, interacting with the media, especially on let's say we're generally just trying to raise awareness about GSIL, its programs, and its people. This is a little bit more like fast food, a whole lot less like your 9-course 4-hour meal. This is going to happen reasonably quickly, which is also why you need to make sure your message is very focused. So for example, with Channel 9, the end result, no matter how long you spend with them, an average story for Channel 9 is between 45 seconds and 1 minute and 15 seconds. It's super quick. In fact, it's been shown more than once that if you printed out every word spoken and a 6 o'clock newscast for, say, WMUR, from good evening to good night, every word would fit on the front page of any newspaper that's out locally with room to spare for pictures. That's all the more information you tend to get from a 6 o'clock newscast. It's brief. Even newspaper stories are shorter than they used to be. So an average length for a decent news story is maybe 300 words or so, sometimes less. sometimes more. But if you think about that, that's a handful of paragraphs tops. So no matter what, it's really important to avoid going too deep into the weeds unless your pitch is the story about one of those particular weeds. So it's essential to keep it simple and to focus their attention immediately into what it is that you're wanting them to focus on. A big roll up of background and a lot of follow up afterwards, it's not bad for context for a reporter so that they understand where in the spectrum of the storytelling you're trying to lead them. But it is very important to be brief and to know that if Channel 9 wants to come to a story about something going on with GSIL, they're probably there 30 minutes or less. If radio or print want to do something, they might not even be showing up in person. The whole thing might happen on either Zoom or in some kind of a phone call or conference call. There's just not a lot. What I would say is this is a lot like a customer service exercise with a consumer. You want to have background information ready that you can either email, send, or share. Have a follow-up afterwards to make sure after they've had a chance to digest for a little bit, you reach back out to them and say, hey, do you need anything else? Are there any questions you came up with? And then once the story has run, you follow back up with a thank you and a, hey, we'll stay connected. It's amazing what a simple thank you to a reporter will do to keep them connected to you and to make it a more memorable exercise. Because, for example, a Channel 9 reporter might have 4 stories in a given day. So you multiply that out over days and weeks and months, and it's a mind-numbing, blinding number of humans that they're interacting with to tell their stories, and they won't even remember what they did yesterday unless you make that impression. So that kind of customer service is super helpful. And I should probably ask and answer a question that you didn't ask me, which is dealing with errors and mistakes. You know, the one thing about dealing with the news media, which we call earned media, is mistakes happen. There are problems and challenges with misunderstanding or misinterpretation. Knowing that it's an imperfect exercise, again, reinforces the importance of making sure you have a simple to-do list of your messages you want to deliver to them so it's not too confusing and complicated. But if a mistake still happens, you know enough to reach out to the reporter and politely ask them to correct it. Online mistakes are very easy. They go back in, they make the correction, they post it, it's done. Things in print, things on the radio, things on TV might require some after the fact clarification. It's important to do it. And it's, you know, just like in personal life, it's also important to do it with a level head and without emotion. Too often, I think because of social media, there's too much keyboard courage and too many people that come in hot when they've got you with a mistake or something. It's really important to remember that if you're gonna chew butts right now against a reporter for an honest and simple mistake, they might not be terribly interested in ever covering something that you want covered in the future. Long-term relationships matter. Don't burn bridges. So it's important to correct a mistake. There are editors and there's a chain of command above a reporter. If for some reason that process gets bogged down or they're not willing to make a change, but just always do it with a cool head and think customer service.
So in lieu of any other hands, I want to ask one more question.
Okay.
So say somebody submits something to radio, media, print, what's the follow-up? Is it you send it, you hope to make a connection with the person who actually responds back and says, hey, thank you for the information, you know, this may or may not run. Do you continue to poke at that person and ask for clarity or ask if they have any other questions, or do you just kind of let it go because they're going to be driving whether or not it gets printed?
I think you've got sort of both, Deb, to be honest with you. For the purposes of the GSIL exercise, I would love to be able to help in a situation like that. So if someone's making a pitch, I would love to be able to make introductions so that there is clarity in the conversation, so that we have some sense of an outcome after we've offered, hey, we can tell this story for you if you want to do it. With that said, your instincts are exactly right. Offer it in, check up with a follow-up, and ask questions about whether they need anything. And I've sort of learned a balancing act with reporters because they operate on deadlines. I've figured out sort of a balancing act of making a pitch and then being able to say to them, hey, what else can I do to help you? Do you need anything more? Can I provide content for you so that you've got like a raw interview and you can do with it whatever you want to? It's your work product. But is there something I can do? Can we reschedule this at a time that's easier? I give them multiple bites at the apple so that they have a way to say yes at some point and make it as easy as possible. And then if they're just saying, no, that's not going to work, then that's when I accept no for an answer and know that I have to go back to that person with another pitch at some point in the future and recognize, okay, this one didn't work, but I'll come back to them again in the future. Deb, I will say that from a reporter's perspective, the deadline is a huge factor in a story and what they're doing. The competition among other things that are going on is always an issue as well. And there are, frequently times where you can make a pitch and a reporter loves the idea, but they've got 4 other stories they're working on because they're the State House reporter and the governor's pitching his budget and somebody just went sideways on a commuter rail argument and 2 lawmakers were arguing in the hallway and nobody expected that. There's always a competition for other stories, which can sometimes make it harder. So you make it as easy as possible by continuing to offer different things. And then if it's a no, you move on to either the next reporter or to your next potential pitch.
Thank you.
Sure. Are there any other questions or things that I can answer? I think I probably moved a little quicker than anticipated on this. Mike, fire away.
Hey, Scott, since this is kind of a training video, we hope others will be able to watch. You shared a lot about how to be proactive with our media and getting our story out. Sometimes media situations arise where we're reacting to things that may have happened here,
Sure. Yeah.
Heaven forbid, it could be negative, right?
Yes.
What advice would you give in those situations? We wouldn't want, somebody who doesn't really have the knowledge of what happened, maybe getting a microphone stuck in their face and answering something that we aren't aware of, or maybe wouldn't feel comfortable with. What is your advice on something like that? And I don't want to be the negative side, but looking at both ways, right?
No, you're right.
All the positive stories, but what can happen in a negative situation? How would you suggest that gets handled for those that may watch this?
Yeah. So Mike, thank you for that. And I'll take a few minutes to walk through that. So crisis communications and that need to be reactive. It happens. It definitely happens. And what I would say is there are sort of a multiple pronged approach to dealing with something like that. So not knowing exactly what the crisis example would be, things that you have to do reasonably quickly. So let's say whether you know about the crisis or not, you get a call from a reporter that says, I've learned of this situation going on. Certainly not a good situation for you. This is happening. Do you have any comment on it? So if you're caught completely flat-footed and you haven't had a chance to prepare, you haven't anticipated a call like this, or heaven forbid, you don't even know that there's a crisis going on, the first thing to do is to find out that reporter's deadline, get as much clarity of information of what the reporter believes is going on as possible, and tell them that you will get back to them. The most important thing is that you get back to that reporter. Never make that promise and then fail to complete it. Even if you have to call them back and say, I'm still working on it, I'm probably not going to meet your deadline, things like that. You can always handle things in a second bite at that apple, but always follow through. Then at that point, it's time to gather the senior team or relevant people together to have a quick behind the scenes huddle and find out what's going on. What are the answers? The importance of trying to get as much info from the reporter in that moment is to be able to check it against what's actually happening. And because of the kind of work that I think we at least occasionally do, check it against what we're allowed to talk about. Very frequently, there are limits, whether it's a HIPAA healthcare related limit, a membership consumer related limit, or perhaps something that doesn't directly have to do with us, and we have to extract ourselves from the story because it ain't us. You have to sort of get a thumbnail sketch of the who, what, when, where, why. You know, it's kind of like we're back to kindergarten, right? Everything we learned in kindergarten. Start with those basic questions, get the sense of what has happened, what you can say, and then get back to that reporter. To your point, Mike, before, it's been my experience in crisis management, especially around things that are happening quickly, emergency, and people know what's going on, like a fire or a gas leak or things like that. It is not unusual for a reporter who hasn't gotten an official statement from whatever. So GSIL doesn't have the official statement, but they know that there's somebody nearby that they think might have seen or heard something. They're going to start knocking doors. And then all of a sudden, you've got, you know, Buford from Allenstown who's saying, oh, I saw the whole friggin' thing and I couldn't believe it was going on. And now that's your spokesperson. And now you have an even bigger headache because you have to reel back in what that person said, which may or may not be true, but certainly isn't said in the way you would want it to be said. So getting information from the reporter, especially if you're caught flat-footed, or if you already know something's going on and the phone rings in the middle of it all, either way, you need to get a sense of what their deadline is and then promise that you'll get back to them. Sometimes getting back to them is giving them a statement. It's all you can say. You can't answer any questions, but you're giving them something and saying, when you have more questions, or if I have more information I can give later on, I will make sure I reach out to you. Again, when you're stressed out in a crisis, it's hard, really hard to think about basic customer service. But trust me when I tell you, the people who keep a cool head during a crisis, and especially are interacting with the media with that same level-headed approach, are the ones who are going to be given a good benefit of the doubt by that reporter who's going to be painting the narrative of how the company is handling this. If you slam the phone down, if you tell them no comment, if you bite their heads off because they've asked a question that's not a really good one, you are risking allowing them to take the narrative that paints you as not handling this thing very well, which will lead to more questions. So the initial step is figuring out what's going on, what you can say, and then getting back to them. And within that leads to different conversations like, is this a holding statement? Is this putting Mike and or Deb in front of a bank of microphones to talk about it? Do we need to do some kind of an interview and then prepare for it? And do we have time to do all of those or any of those things based on the deadline that's been laid in front of us by reporters? And again, in a situation like that, having someone like myself who's got some media experience and can talk behind the scenes with some of these reporters to at least help try to figure out what's going on and how to help, whether it's clarify, turn it into a glancing blow, or just take it on, that happening in real time is important. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think that's important, very important for everyone to know.
Thanks, Mike. Val, I see, were you asking a question?
Yeah, to piggyback on what Mike said, you know, you're caught off guard, you want to help. But if you feel you're not the right person to be answering the question, regardless if you have all the answers, when you get back to someone, is it okay to defer to a person that has a little bit more expertise, like a Deb or a Mike? They called you, but you're not, whether it's confident enough or you just want to make sure the right messaging. Is it okay to call them back and say, we have an answer, but I'm going to defer to so-and-so? Is that
absolutely
acceptable? You don't
oh my gosh, Val.
Credibility?
Yeah, no, that's great. Again, that's your customer service. That's not only the right instinct, that should be sort of the biblical law at GSIL. When a reporter just calls in and maybe, you know, gets a number that is not Deb's or Mike's, any media interactions, regardless of who ultimately ends up being quoted, because Val, you might be the best voice depending on the story. But the best thing to always do whenever there's a reporter is that any of the staff members at GSIL need to get a hold of Deb and or Mike right away to pass along the message, bring them into the loop, and give them the opportunity to make that decision. Because there could be other factors going on around that story or a reason why that reporter may have called. It's just important to make sure senior management is in the loop and signs off on what's being said or what's getting ready to happen. Because, I mean, quite frankly, any of the operations of any business, for-profit, nonprofit, otherwise, The senior team might have a different perspective, bigger picture, or more detail about anything that other folks in senior management, middle management, or lower employee levels would know what's going on. So it's really important never to be cavalier, even if it's in the best interests and trying to help, to just jump in and say, yep, you can quote me on the record. It's always best to, again, how long have I got to get back to you? I think I can give you to our CEO or to Mike or to Jeff. Let me get back to you. What do you need to know? Just sort of getting the information. It's almost like taking a message for your kid when someone's calling saying, I'm looking for, it's that simple. But your instinct is exactly right to make sure that you run it up the flagpole.
Scott?
I have another question if I may. Oh, no, Jeff, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Question for you, Scott. If you watch movies and stuff, you see people say off the record, but I've heard from plenty of people, there's no such thing as off the record. So I was just wondering if you could comment on that.
That's a great question. So my favorite way of answering that question is that off the record is one of these terms that all of us can stare at each other and say, I know exactly what that means. But let me give you 2 examples of how a reporter might consider information off the record that could save your butt or fry it. So let's say I'm talking to Mike. I've got the microphone and he says, listen, off the record, this is what's really going on. And he shares with me a pretty juicy tidbit. Mike's definition of off the record is he's giving it to me so that I can use it and broadcast it to the world, but not tell where I got it from. He's my source now, and I'm sources tell News 9 that blah, 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 blah. And that's why he gave it to me. That's his off the record. I talked to Deb, who tells me off the record the exact same piece of information, but she's telling me that so that I know what it is and that I need to go someplace else to independently confirm it. That if I go with that information, there's probably only 3 people on the planet that know this story, so that if I go with it, somebody's getting fired. And that's off the record too. 2 completely different interpretations that yield 2 completely different results. So Jeff, to your question, the answer is yep. There's really no good realm for going off the record. It's a bad idea. Whatever you can say to a reporter, make sure you realize whatever's coming out of your mouth is fit for print. So be disciplined and careful. Don't go off the record. Now, with that said, do I go off the record? I do, because I'd say that there's a difference in the relationships that I have with reporters than most people who might get cold called from someone who's got the notepad, but they don't know them. If you have a relationship with someone and you can go on background to give them maybe a reason why this story is being told, or some of the little factoids that they just need to know, and you can point them where to get it, but you've got that relationship, sure, you can not be quoted, but still have influence over how that story is told and what facts are shared. But that's a much higher level conversation that should never, ever be a first option or second option, or maybe even a 5th option. It's best just to work in the realm of what you can say and don't get too cute. Deb, you had a question?
Yeah, so I'm just playing out this scenario where there could be somebody who wants to send a message to media. So whatever the format is, it doesn't matter. And they bypassed you, bypassed GSIL. They just, have something that they really want to talk about publicly. When someone does that, should they be using the forum of writing the same letter, if you will? Say they're going to send a letter to MUR, the newspapers, the radios.
Mm-hmm.
Should they be sending the exact same letter to every single media outlet that they use? Or can it be like, well, I'm going to send this letter over here and I'm going to use more detail over here and I'm going to word it differently over here? Because I've seen in the past where, people get something that they're very passionate about and they start writing.
Mm-hmm.
And they send it off. And then a couple of days later, they're still like really, it's really sitting with them that they just didn't say enough in the first letter. So now they're sending a second letter that has different details, not wrong or incorrect, but just either more details or juicier details maybe? Like what is the, you know, kind of best practice standard for when you're trying to get a message out to multiple media outlets regarding really the same thing?
Yeah, sure. So consistency is king, first and foremost, and brevity matters. And here's why. So David Sakowicz is the guy at Channel 9 who works the desk all day long and is the assignment director. On any given day, David gets at least 200 pitches for news coverage, at least. So we are one of an overwhelming chorus of voices that we're competing against. So my advice has always been, like, if you think about an email or you're thinking about it like a press release, if your headline and first sentence doesn't get their attention, nothing else you write after that is going to matter. So my approach has always been, give a high level gist about the story pitch and why it should be told. And then if you've got a lot of information to share, bullet a couple of highlighted points to it, and then offer to have a conversation to be able to fill in more blanks. Because quite frankly, the more information you give and it turns into a cascading 3-page email, they're never going to read it unless you have somehow hit the lottery and struck them right out of the gate and they're reading it and this is like really good, or it's salacious because you've attached it to a lawsuit or something like that. You're going to struggle to keep their attention for a long period of time because of that competition. So consistency among all media outlets, the offer to follow up and have a conversation, and brevity.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have any other questions? I think it's important, especially as folks might be looking at this after the fact and not in sort of real time. Because I'm connected to GSIL and I'm at Deb's beck and call and Mike's beck and call, I'm perfectly happy to be shopped out for the GSIL causes for things exactly like this. Whether it's, hey, we've got the story, we need to brainstorm how to pitch it, or we got that all together, we need to use Scott's Rolodex and pitch it to specific people. Whatever that is, I'm here to help with that exercise, because part of my role here is to try to help raise as much awareness as possible about the awesomeness of GSIL. So if there's any sort of finishing thought, it would be that I'm here and I'm easy to find and would be happy to help with this kind of process.
Well, and Scott, I appreciate that. And I'll speak, on behalf of those who work at GSIL and those who use services at GSIL, that we appreciate that, because like you said, we have a story to tell. Our story isn't always sexy, but our story is a good story. It's a humbling story. And it's one that should be broadcast all the time in every media outlet, because, what we do is important to Granite Staters. So I appreciate your help in that, and thank you for that.
No, it's my pleasure. And again, it's such a wonderful cause. It's an honor to be a part of it all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the one thing that I want to mention before we hang up is this is our third session that we have scheduled. We already had our first two meetings, advocacy training, and then also Ryan did a great training on the New Hampshire General Court website. Those have been posted to the GSIL website. So this meeting will also be posted in the next couple of days. So if you missed the first two, please log on to our website and you'll be able to watch those at your convenience. Again, Scott, we appreciate your help, Ryan and Jeff, for also putting these together, because I think they're vitally important, and just knowing that we're here to support people is important.
I love it. Thank you, Deb. And thanks to everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
You
Yeah,
got it,
Thanks,
Mike.
Brian and Jeff.
Good
Appreciate
to see
it.
everybody.
you too. Stay
All
warm.
right.
Yeah, you too. Take care, y'all.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.